Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are excited that you're joining us for today's episode of the show. Ryan, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about a trip we took to Chiapas.
And where's Chiapas?
Chiapas is the southernmost state in Mexico, right on the border with Guatemala.
Yeah, and so this had been actually on our Mexico bucket list for a number of years. We have quite a few friends who have traveled to Chiapas, and we've heard nothing but really amazing things about this state in Mexico. So like Ryan said, it is the southernmost state. It borders Guatemala. And then also to give you context for where it is in the country, it also borders Tabasco, a tiny bit of Veracruz, and Oaxaca. And so it's pretty well positioned. And Chiapas is really known for its nature, I would say. There's a lot of really incredible natural things to see in Chiapas.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think if you weren't really informed on what Mexico is geographically speaking, you might think that part of the country and you think Guatemala, Chiapas, and think kind of super hot, almost tropical, which can be there because Chiapas does have the coast. But a lot of central Chiapas is way up on the highlands. So it's actually, going to San Cristobal de las Casas, which is the most kind of popular touristic city in Chiapas. You actually find yourself being chilled quite a bit of the time, and we definitely were as well. But a place that's really known for incredible nature, geography, coffee, lots of agriculture, and then, of course, you'll also hear it in the news for some of the other challenges that kind of exist in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we decided to take a long weekend to Chiapas. We flew out on a Thursday morning and then back on a Sunday. So we had pretty much all of Thursday, all of Friday, and all of Saturday in Chiapas, which was really awesome. Although, to be quite honest, really not enough time to explore the state of Chiapas. So we had to kind of choose what we wanted to do with what was kind of close to where we were. So we got a flight into Tuxtla, which is the capital city of the state of Chiapas. And you don't really hear a lot about Tuxtla. It's not one of those Mexican cities that is on a lot of lists of places to see. You might not even have ever heard of that city. The city that most people talk about within Chiapas is San Cristobal de las Casas, and that is the city that we ended up staying in, and it's about probably an hour and a half away from the airport in Tuxtla.
Yeah, and so Tuxtla Gutierrez, which is the full name, is the capital of Chiapas, and so kind of economically, there's maybe more going on there, and it's got a population of just over 600,000 people. When you fly in, you're still a little bit away from it. But you can see the city in the distance. And San Cristobal is definitely much more of a touristically focused city, also kind of culturally and artistically important, and has a population of just around 100,000 people. So definitely kind of much smaller. And as you walk around, you get more of that small city vibe going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like I said before, we decided to take a long weekend, but there's really a ton of different ways that you could travel Chiapas. Chiapas is often on kind of the backpacker trail. A lot of people will come through Guatemala and enter Mexico via the border with Chiapas and then spend some time kind of backpacking through that area before heading on to other parts of Mexico. Lots of people will stay longer than we did in Chiapas, maybe a week or maybe even 2 weeks or something like that. So there's kind of a variety of ways that you can do a Chiapas trip, and we'll share what we were able to fit in a long weekend.
Yeah, and it also seems like San Cristobal is a bit of a hub for kind of older retirees. And I think in the future, as the Wi-Fi gets better, it seems like the potential place where it could be quite popular with nomads as well, just because of the culture, the interesting things to do around, and the really kind of mild climate on top of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like traditionally, like Chiapas hasn't really been a quote unquote digital nomad hub for people in Mexico just because it's kind of well known that the internet's not the best in Chiapas. But I just recently heard that there is a co working space there now. So I think would make it like a really great hub for nomads because there is so much to explore in that area. And if you were based in that side in Mexico, you could also, travel quite easily over to Guatemala too, which would be pretty cool. So San Cristobal definitely has a lot of tourism going on. When we were there, we saw lots of international tourism as well as lots of local Mexican tourism as well. And then like Ryan said, there's also, the retiree community. And then, like we mentioned, also the backpacking community. So very diverse.
Yeah. And so in Chiapas, it's one of those places where you want to be able to get out and go around. So we're going to talk about some of the most famous, most impressive kind of natural things to do, but you are moving around. And so the kind of two main ways to deal with that are one, to rent a car, or two, to do tours. A lot of people who are backpacking or on a tighter budget will look for different tours. And there are lots of them, especially if you're just walking around San Cristobal. You'll find lots of people offering tours. You can also find kind of collectivos and do it more that way. But for us, we decided that renting a car would give us kind of the best experience, the best ability to kind of get out and see things. You will read a few, like when you're researching driving in Chiapas, you can hear, if you're going online, some people recommending against it. We went for it and had a really good experience, no issues whatsoever, really, apart from a few smaller things we'll talk about, but nothing in terms of like safety that concerned us. But we have had experience driving in Mexico, so we felt a little bit more comfortable going for it, and having a car allowed us to kind of get out, see things with a bit more freedom on our own that we really enjoyed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even the fact that, like Ryan mentioned before, that the airport in Tuxtla is like 30 minutes outside of the city, you would either be reliant on public transit or taking some sort of like a cab into the city and then a bus to San Cristobal, if that's where you were staying, which most likely it would be. And it just would be a lot of extra effort to do that. So for us, especially only being there for a long weekend, we felt like it was really worth it to have our own vehicle. And so we rented it right from the airport so we could do, pick up and drop off there. And everything was very smooth. We arrived, we picked up our car, and then we headed out right away to have our first meal in Chiapas and then go see some things.
Yeah, and the very first thing on our list to see was the Canyon de Sumidero, which is honestly one of the most impressive looking natural things we've seen in our entire lives. An incredible canyon, definitely on par with like the Grand Canyon or any other canyon out there, I would have to say. And if you just Google it and look at some of the photos, you'll immediately understand why. And so it's actually very close to Tuxtla, which is the capital, which is where the airport is. And San Cristobal de las Casas is, about an hour driving? So we thought, okay, it makes a lot of sense to just get the car and go try to do this immediately. And there's kind of two different ways to see the canyon. One is in a boat tour, which is the most popular way. And the second way is actually you can drive up above the city. You can enter the national park in car. And then there's a number of different lookup points that are all the way on top of the canyon. And so we originally were probably only planning on doing one of those. So we drove initially down to the boat landings where all the boats launch from. And we were there a little bit later in the afternoon than most of them leave. And the wind had picked up. So they were actually closed. They weren't running boat tours. And so we actually decided, okay, well, if we can't do it this way, we'll go drive up and look at some of the viewpoints. And I'm really glad we did because we went the next day to do the boat. But this allowed us to get to see two different sides of the canyons. And it's really interesting. You drive just up and up and up and up, and it feels like you're going forever. And you have some pretty incredible views back over the city, but nothing really down into the canyon until you pull up at one of the first viewpoints. And you get out of your car and you just walk over the edge and you look down, and it's about 1,000 meters. So a kilometer straight down sheer cliff into this really blue river.
Yeah, it is absolutely stunning. And we'll put some photos on Instagram. There already are some. We'll add some more. And of course, in the show notes and whatnot, because it's just absolutely magical to see. And I completely echo what Ryan said. It was kind of a blessing that the boat tour was closed for the afternoon, because then we got this incredible view, and things are so different from below and above. But just to give you a couple of facts, Ryan already mentioned that, the Sumidero Canyon's walls vertically reach as high as 1,000 meters, which is about 3,300 feet. And it's about 13 kilometers or 8.1 miles long. So that's like the length of the canyon. So you can get a good sense for how kind of high it is and then how long it is. And it's pretty cool on the boat because you get to go basically the whole length of the canyon and see it at its highest points and then some lowest points. And it's just really incredible. I was so surprised that this isn't something that you hear about if you're not kind of in Mexico, traveling around Mexico, talking to people who spend a lot of time in Mexico.
Yeah, and one other thing that was also kind of surprising to us, just driving up there, and surprising on one hand, but not on another, but it's a very impressive national park, and the views are incredible. But at each of these little viewpoints, there's probably only 15, 20 parking spots maybe. And most of the places where we're pulling in, they're fairly empty. Of course, we're traveling at a, interesting time in March of 2021, but there were still a ton of tourists, a ton of people visiting San Cristobal. But as far as actually driving and visiting the viewpoints above the canyon, it was very quiet. Like I said, kind of certain spots where there'd be only another car or two, which felt weird because thinking about, the Grand Canyon or some of these other super impressive places that are just slammed with people. And we felt like in a lot of ways we had some of these areas to ourselves and had a really great time because of it. And so the next morning we ended up, after this, we drove all the way up to San Cristobal de las Casas, stayed overnight, got breakfast, and headed out early the next day to get onto a boat tour to see the other side of the canyon.
Yeah. And so like Ryan mentioned before, there's lots of options for getting day tours that can, take you on these tours. Since we had our car, we opted to just do it ourselves. So we just drove to one of the ports. There's a couple different ports that you can go to right near the canyon. And we just basically went and bought a ticket and then got onto a boat. Our boat was completely full. So I think being on a Saturday and in the morning, things were definitely a bit more bumping. It seemed like they were, shuttling quite a few people and quite a few boats kind of into the canyon. And it's pretty cool. You're in this boat driving through the canyon, stopping to see different wildlife and see different points of interest and that type of thing for about 2 hours. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe even a tiny bit longer.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid tour, probably, 2 to 3 hours. And you you boat all the way to the end of the canyon, which is actually a dam on the north end. And it's kind of cool because you go through points where, like we said, it's, 1,000 meters of rock on either side of you. It's quite narrow. You're really in this canyon. And then you come out on the other side with smaller mountains, more foothills, rolling hills, and then this gigantic dam. So it's a pretty interesting experience all in all. And then this is a very Mexican experience, but I feel like it's worth sharing. We get to the end and you've kind of got a quote unquote OXXO via boat. It's a dude with snacks in a boat, and everyone's buying snacks and enjoying, something to eat while we're kind of at the sort of past the midpoint, but nearing the end of the tour. It's snack break. And then we turn around and, drive back through the canyon all the way to our starting point. So it was pretty fun overall.
Yeah. And so it ends up being kind of a half day to a 3/4 day, especially depending on your transportation, where you're coming from. And so we went back to San Cristobal. And San Cristobal is a really interesting city. It's up very high altitude. So the temperatures are actually quite cool, especially at night. And if you're coming from other parts of Mexico, it can be quite an intense transition, especially because lots of buildings don't have as much heating in them. So you want to make sure you pack a sweater, you pack sweatpants, all that type of gear that you'll need. But just walking around San Cristobal, it's really buzzing. There's lots of restaurants, lots of good food. And Chiapas is really known for coffee, for chocolate, and for lots of kind of agricultural products, lots of good food that comes out of there. And you definitely kind of see that in San Cristobal with all the options for places to go and places to eat.
Yeah, for sure. We ate a ton of great meals in San Cristobal while we were there. And we also had a lot of good coffee. So I feel like when we weren't kind of exploring the things outside of San Cristobal, we were just kind of wandering the streets of the town, just trying new coffee shops and trying new places to get drinks and food. And we uncovered a lot of like really cool spaces to get food and drinks, which we can put some links to that in the show notes. And one other thing that I think is worth mentioning about San Cristobal, you mentioned it, that it's, up in the mountains and it's a little bit cooler. It definitely gave me a little bit more of like a South American vibe. So kind of like, if you've been to South America or like Peru in specific, I feel like Cusco kind of vibes or like Arequipa kind of vibes where there are smaller, more cobblestone streets, more colorful houses and that type of thing. And then the landscape is very mountainous, higher altitude, lots of people kind of, dressed in sweaters and puffy jackets and hats, even though, the temperature is still like well above zero and that type of thing. And so I think for us, like, it's been so many years since we spent a long time in South America. It was kind of fun to be in a city where we're like, oh, this feels like somewhere we've been before.
Yeah, it's a really awesome city to visit and a place we really enjoyed just kind of walking around. We ended up staying at a smaller hotel. I don't honestly know if there are too many bigger hotels, but a lot of kind of smaller, more boutique style hotels. A lot of them are very, very affordable. Just to give you kind of a sense for this, I was looking at booking this trip and I misinterpreted the entire price of our hotel for 3 nights as being the 1 night price. So I was looking and I was like, oh, it's a little bit more expensive than I thought, but it's still kind of reasonable. And then I was like, oh, wait, that's like 3 nights of the hotel. So very affordable and really cool city. And it's the type of place where it's hard because in Chiapas, using San Cristobal as a base to kind of get out and do stuff, you still want to make some time to get around the city, to eat at the restaurants. And so it's definitely a place where you could stay a little bit longer as well. And so for us, we actually had our 3rd day coming up, which was our last full day in the state of Chiapas because we were going to be flying out the following morning. And we weren't entirely sure what we wanted to do. We knew we had our car and we wanted to get out of the city and go check out something else, one of the other attractions. But there are lots of different options in Chiapas. So what are kind of like the top options and what did we end up deciding we wanted to do with our free day?
Yeah, so this was kind of a hard decision because, like you mentioned, there are a lot of different things to choose from. And so I was doing a lot of research on where things were and trying to figure out what would make the most sense for a day trip from San Cristobal. And so one of the things that's really famous and really well known to do is Palenque. And Palenque is a set of ruins that is kind of more towards the border with Tabasco. And so it's a number of hours away from San Cristobal. So I feel like that is something if you were going to do like maybe a loop and then stay like a night or two so you could really get like a full on grasp of what Palenque is all about. So that's one option. We decided we didn't have enough time to fully enjoy that. So it's definitely still on our list. And then another thing that's really famous is Los Lagos de Montebello. And those are closer to the Guatemalan border. So again, a number of hours from San Cristobal, but towards sort of like the southwest area of that. And we did contemplate that because we could have definitely done it in a day trip, but then again, just decided, this is somewhere where we could probably spend more than 1 day. So why don't we save it for some time when we have more time? And so we decided to go check out a waterfall that's pretty famous. It's called El Chiflón. And it was just a couple of hours away. And we were able to actually make like a nice loop out of it. So we got to see a bit more of the state.
Yeah, one of the great things about renting a car, if you listen to our recent episode talking about going down to Manzanillo, is that you get to kind of drive through some of the areas that you otherwise might not see, or if you were in a bus, you might not pay attention to. And so to get to El Chiflón, you drive southeast, I guess it were, and you go down a little bit in altitude, driving through some of the more kind of rural-ish areas of Chiapas. And it was really cool to drive through and see. We were driving at a time where it appeared that a lot of sugarcane was being harvested. So you'd see all sorts of trucks packed sky high with sugarcane and lots of kind of agricultural stuff going on. And then eventually we reached El Chiflan. It's kind of interesting because there's obviously only one main waterfall site. There's actually a couple different parts of it. But then there's kind of two parks, I guess you could say, one on either side of the river that allow you to walk and kind of get access to see the waterfall. And so for us, we weren't entirely sure which one we wanted to be at because there are people who kind of flag you down and point you into like, hey, come here, come here. But it turns out you can go to either side, no problem. I think kind of both sides seemed good. The side that we ended up not going to allowed you to get a little bit closer to the waterfall at the top. And so that would be the, I guess, east side of the river. And we were on the other side, but it was still both beautiful, both really pleasant walks. It was interesting, and something we kind of experienced all over in Chiapas was you have these wild temperature swings, especially if you're traveling and you're spending your evenings in San Cristobal, where it can be very cool in the evening, very cool in the morning. But then especially if you're heading down, by the time you get to somewhere in the middle of the day, it's scorching hot. And we definitely felt that at El Chiflan. We were both sweating as we were walking around and thinking about, hey, it would be great to get in and swim here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just wild. Like we left in the morning and we got, coffees because we were chilly. We have like runners on, pants, sweaters, jackets. And then as we're slowly like weaving our way kind of down this mountain and into a valley, it's just getting hotter and hotter as the day progresses, but then just also as like the climate changes. And by the time we got out at the waterfall, it actually felt like it was like the tropics. Like I was like, I'm wearing the wrong clothes for this. And after we went on a little hike, it wasn't too much of a hike, but probably took us maybe 30 to 45 minutes to get to the waterfall. We were just like dripping in sweat, needed to get more water, wanted cold water at that. And just a wild difference between, these locations that are only a couple of hours apart geographically.
Yeah. And the other thing, driving in Chiapas is quite interesting because Chiapas is a state where it's a lot more kind of, I guess you could call it like self-government. And so driving through small towns, you'll see speed limits kind of change randomly. You'll see speed bumps that are getting put out by different neighborhoods. Sometimes the road quality can change dramatically from here to there. And especially because we were there in a time where there was like agricultural harvesting going on, you get stuck behind lots of big trucks that you couldn't pass, although people would still be passing you. So the roads were a bit crazy, and it ended up taking us quite a while to drive, a bit longer than we thought. And on the way back, we actually ended up having our car start to overheat and started creating some problems with the transmission. Around the exact same time, it started pouring rain, and we realized we were out of cell phone range. And so definitely gave us a bit of a scare on the drive home.
Yeah, for sure. If you guys listened to the episode of The Sweaty Traveler with our friend Mac that we did on her show, she actually asked us to talk about this story. And it's kind of funny looking back, but it was like a bit stressful at the time. We have this like car that's been running completely fine. We have no reason to think that something would be wrong with it. And then Ryan's driving and he's like, I can't get the car to get over like 60 kilometers an hour. And I'm like, what is that about? Like, that's kind of weird. I don't even know what to think about that. I go to Google it to see like what is happening. Have no cell service. We're quite far from San Cristobal at this point, like probably still an hour away driving. And it starts dumping rain right as our car like decides to just basically put all of the lights it has on and then shut off. So thankfully we were safely on the side of the road. We were able to turn it off and turn it back on, and it started. And we turned, the aircon off and the Bluetooth off, and basically stopped using anything that we didn't need to. And somehow we made it back. The car got us all the way back to San Cristobal and then all the way back to the airport.
Yeah, so we went back that night, had one last night, had an early morning breakfast, and then headed out to the airport. And that was the end of our trip in Chiapas. We actually flew in and flew out from Merida, which is a very short flight and was very affordable. So I feel like we actually had a bit of a different experience to most people because backpacking is very common to go take a trip through San Cristobal, or people going for a bit of a longer stay and exploring more of Chiapas. So I think for us, we definitely got enough to have an interesting taste of Chiapas, but definitely leave wanting to come back and wanting to do more because, like we've mentioned, there is so much to see and so much to do, even just within San Cristobal, some of the other communities, lots of interesting smaller towns, especially as you get towards the Guatemalan border. There are Mayan ruins, there are incredible kind of lakes and other things to see down there. So much more that still remains on our list to do for Chiapas, but just from the first taste of it we got, I think we both really loved our experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I listed a couple of other things that are like popular tourist attractions, but that list is much more extensive than that. There's a lot of things to do in Chiapas. So I think my actual recommendation for Chiapas, or what I would like to do next time, would be to rent a car like we did, but plan probably a longer trip, maybe 7 to 10 days, and plan, a couple days in the San Cristobal area like we did, but then do some sort of a loop where we're able to go more south, see Lagos de Montebello, go closer to the border, see some of the other things that are popular and interesting around there, make our way up to Palenque, and then maybe, loop back around. I think that would give a much more like comprehensive experience of seeing the state. But I definitely echo what you said, Ryan. I really liked the little taste that we got of it. I felt like the Sumidero Canyon was like, just blew me away. It was like way cooler than I ever expected it to be, and just really fell in love with a new state in Mexico.
Yeah, and I think for me, the only thing I'd touch on, I think that would be exactly what I'd love to do trip-wise. There also are some amazing things and some amazing beaches in the southern bits of Oaxaca, which is right where it starts to border on Chiapas. And I think that could be really interesting to go travel through there and into Chiapas that way. So I think we definitely have a trip to Chiapas in our future again. But is there anything else we want to touch on in this episode before we kind of wrap it up?
I think we've covered a good chunk of our experience in Chiapas. So I would just say, if you are somebody who's interested in traveling Mexico, which I would presume you are if you're listening to this episode, definitely add Chiapas to your bucket list. I think unless you have traveled Mexico a little bit, I feel like it's not always like top of the list. And I really do feel like there's so much that the state has to offer. And, like you mentioned before, it's very accessible. So if you are going somewhere in the Yucatan Peninsula, like Merida, Playa del Carmen, Tulum, Cancun, somewhere like that, you can probably get a pretty easy flight down to Chiapas. Like you also said, very close to Oaxaca. So if you're going to the Oaxaca area, Chiapas is not that far from there. And then, of course, Mexico City is so central. You can get flights anywhere in Mexico. So if you're in the Mexico City area, pretty easy, just like hop down to Chiapas. So I would definitely recommend adding it to your Mexico bucket list.
And as always, we'll have show notes up to accompany this episode, which will have some more links to places we ate, the things we saw, and some other things to see and do that are still on our list, still on our travel bucket list. But if you're planning a trip, so you can go check those out, you can always find that at theworldwanderers.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast, and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.